But the transformation didn't stop at crops and cattle. Neolithic people revolutionized their surroundings, carving the world into their own image. Forests once teeming with wildlife were cleared to make space for villages and farmlands. Rivers were diverted. Hills were leveled. For the first time, humanity became the dominant geological force on Earth. Entire ecosystems began to shift in response to the human footprint, and some species of wild animals, unable to adapt, began to disappear, not just due to overhunting, but because their habitats were transformed or destroyed by agricultural expansion. Villages evolved into permanent settlements with increasing complexity. In some areas, like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, people built densely packed mud brick homes with rooftop access, where entire communities lived in tightly connected blocks. There were no streets in the conventional sense, people moved across rooftops, and entrances were often through the ceiling. These were not just shelters, but organized communities with shrines, artwork, burial chambers, and even the earliest forms of communal planning. Daily life involved more than farming. Craftspeople produced tools, clothing, and early forms of art and trade goods, while religious and social practices wove a fabric of identity that went far beyond survival. Religion during the Neolithic wasn't abstract, it was interwoven with the land. Many archaeologists believe early agrarian societies practiced forms of fertility worship, centered around the cycles of nature, planting, harvest, birth, and death. Stone figurines of women with exaggerated features, like the famous Venus of Willendorf, suggest that female fertility was revered, likely tied to agricultural abundance. These beliefs eventually solidified into organized rituals and spiritual practices that reinforced social cohesion. Across ancient Europe and Asia, early temples and ceremonial structures began to appear, such as Göbekli Tepe, predating Stonehenge by thousands of years and completely redefining how early religion and society were viewed. In tandem with their spiritual lives, Neolithic people developed an entirely new relationship with time. With farming came seasons, and with seasons came the need for calendars. The skies became crucial, people began observing the movements of the sun and moon not just for survival, but for ceremony. Megalithic structures like Newgrange in Ireland and Stonehenge in Britain weren't just mysterious stone circles, they were celestial observatories aligned with solstices and equinoxes, demonstrating an astonishing understanding of astronomy for prehistoric times. This wasn't trial and error, this was centuries of accumulated observational knowledge passed down and refined across generations. But life in the Neolithic wasn't always idyllic. Settling down came at a cost. While hunter-gatherers had relatively diverse and flexible diets, early farmers often became reliant on a narrow set of staple crops. This shift led to nutritional deficiencies, with skeletal remains showing signs of malnutrition and stunted growth. Living in one place also made communities more vulnerable to crop failures, droughts, and disease. Permanent settlements enabled the spread of infections. Measles, smallpox, and tuberculosis are all believed to have originated during this time due to close proximity with both animals and other people. And as populations grew, so did inequality. The earliest signs of social stratification appear in the Neolithic. Burials with ornate goods and tools suggest the rise of elite classes, while others were interred without ceremony or possessions. Trade, too, took on new dimensions. The Neolithic wasn't an isolated chapter, it was the spark that lit the flame of global exchange. Obsidian tools from Anatolia have been found in the Levant. Jade from China traveled hundreds of miles across ancient trade routes. In Britain, flint from specific mines was considered so valuable that it was transported across vast distances. These early economies laid the groundwork for marketplaces, barter systems, and eventually, monetary exchange. In Europe, the linear pottery culture, or LBK culture, spread rapidly across the continent, marking one of the most significant expansions in human prehistory. With their distinctive ceramics and farming techniques, these people pushed westward from the Danube into France, Germany, and even the British Isles. Each settlement left behind an archaeological footprint, grave sites, tools, food stores, and domestic structures, all telling stories of innovation, migration, and adaptation. In Asia, similar revolutions occurred independently. In China, the Yangshao and Longshan cultures developed rice farming, painted pottery, and fortified villages. In the Indian subcontinent, the Murgar culture, a Neolithic precursor to the Indus Valley civilization, mastered irrigation, dentistry, yes, they performed rudimentary tooth drilling, and large-scale grain storage. These weren't isolated echoes, they were parallel evolutions of the same human spark, one that turned wild land into civilization. And then, there's the extraordinary transition to metallurgy. The late Neolithic Age gave way to the Chalcolithic, or Copper Age, a period where stone tools began to be supplemented, and then replaced, by metal ones. This ushered in new forms of agriculture, warfare, and craftsmanship. Axes became sharper. Swords were born. Jewelry became a status symbol. This metallurgical dawn hinted at the massive technological shifts to come, culminating in the Bronze Age, where the foundations of ancient empires were laid. So, what does this all mean today? The Neolithic wasn't just a period of transition, it was a revolution. A profound shift not only in how humans survived, but in how they thought, believed, built, and interacted with the natural world. It was the first time humans reshaped ecosystems to suit their needs. It was the birth of ownership, of family legacies tied to land, of laws, of borders, of culture. It laid the foundation for everything that followed, from cities to nations, from writing to warfare, from religion to science. And perhaps most astonishing of all, it was done without modern tools, without written instruction, without centralized governments or universities. It was raw human ingenuity. Trial, error, failure, triumph, all repeated across thousands of years by countless communities, many of whom left behind only broken pots and silent stones. But those stones whisper a truth we must not forget: the Neolithic Age didn't just shape history, it created the world we live in. As we face modern challenges, climate change, food insecurity, social inequality, it's worth remembering that 10,000 years ago, our ancestors stood on the edge of an unknown future, and built something entirely new. And if they could do it, so can we.